Okay, we're continuing to learn our English today. And in these lessons, we're going to be talking about the past simple. So this is one of the grammar that we use when we need to tell people, we need to tell someone about what happened sometime in the past. So that means maybe what happened yesterday, what happened last night, what happened 10 years ago, what happened last Christmas, what happened last holidays. So it allows us to speak about anything that happened in our life in the past moment. That is the time. So that's why it's called past simple. So we'll be having a look at the grammar for the past simple. And starting with the verb to be, we know that the verb to be is was or were. So we know we say I was, you were, we were, they were, he was, she was, it was. Okay, so starting with the verb to be and then looking at all our other action verbs like to study, to speak, to play, to dance, to sing, to visit, to see. Putting these verbs in the past and making sure we know the rules for the regular ones and the ones for the irregular. So because there's different ways that we need to make that verb in the past. Okay, so let's have a look at just those two grammars. So we've got the verb to be and then our verbs in the regular and the irregular. So let's get into our lesson with the past simple. And before we do, let's have a look at just some time. So we've got centuries. So a century means every 100 years. So right now, we are in the 21st century. We are here. So the 21st century is the year 2000 to the year 2099. So now the year is 2024. So we are in the 21st century. It's just what they call this 100-year time. They just call it the 21st century. The one before was the 20th century. And this was from 1900 to 1999. And then we have, so this is when most of us was born. So I was born in the 20th century because I was born in the year 1985. So you could see 1985. Then we have the 19th century, which is the years 1800 to 1899. And we keep going back. You could see another 100 years, another 100 years, until you get all the way, you could see here, the 1st century. And then we get to this point. This is called the birth of Jesus Christ. So this is where we begin our counting of the year. And so BC is all the years that come before it. So before this time, the year will be BC. And BC, that means before Christ. And then any years that come after are called AD. So if you see, for example, the year 500 BC, that means 500 years before. So there's 500 years here before the birth of Jesus. So a long time from here. So 2024, which is the year that we're in now, plus 500, it means that many years ago. Okay, so that's just how we talk about the centuries, the time. Remember, because we are talking about the past, so we do want to know just with time, with the year, what year we're in. Okay, before we do some exercises, let's talk about the verb to be. So we have one of the most important verbs is the verb to be, and it's using it with certain ways. So we could say was or were. And I have it here. Was or were. So you start with your subject. It depends who you're talking about. It could be I, could be you, she. If you're talking about someone, he, they, or we. And then you have was or were, but it depends who's doing the action. So if it's I say I was, he was, she was, they were, we were, you were. And we use this verb when we talk about our age, when we talk about our place of location, when we talk about our job, when we talk about some adjectives, or a feeling, a motive verb, or maybe when we were born. Okay, so it's like saying a sentence like, I was 5 years old when something happened, or I was in I don't know, I was in Melbourne last weekend. Or the job, I was a student before I became a teacher. Or an adjective, you know, maybe it was raining yesterday. Or you know, you were so beautiful yesterday at the party. Or we use it when we were born. So I was born in 1985. So that's when we use the verb to be. Remember, the verb to be is was or were. So we only use it when we need to talk about this information, when we need to give this information. And an emotive verb is like saying, I was upset yesterday. I was scared because something happened to me yesterday, or I was so excited yesterday because something. Now, to make it a negative sentence, you just add the word not. So you could say wasn't, because we're attaching the verb to be with not, or weren't. So for example, I wasn't at that party last week. I wasn't, you know, I wasn't a student last year. I wasn't 20 years old in that time. I wasn't upset yesterday. I wasn't born in 1981. So you can make, you know, make a negative sentence. You can also use it with saying there was with a singular noun. So we can also use the verb with nouns. So for example, yesterday there was a book on my table. Or, you know, last week there was a party at my friend's house. Or for the plural nouns, there were. So at the party, there were many people. Or there were lots of things to buy at the markets when I went on the weekend. Okay, so that's how we use the verb to be in the past. We can also make questions with the verb to be. So you could use one of the W's, what, when, where, why, who, but not with which. And then you put was or were, and then the subject and the verb. So for example, what was his name? Or when was that party that you were talking about? Or why was he crying yesterday? Or, you know, who was at your birthday? Okay, or you can also make the question by starting with the verb to be, was or were, subject, and then those same information we had before. So was he 20? Was he in the city? Was she a lawyer then? Was she upset? Okay, so lots of questions as well. Okay, so that's all you need to know about the verb. So there's two most important verbs, the verb to be and the verb to have. And for now, we're just learning about the verb to be in the past. Again, we use it to talk about this information. This is before talking about, you know, verbs like to speak, to listen, to dance, to play, you know, like an action word. These are just your age, your location, your job, how you're feeling. We use this verb for that reason. We can make a negative and we can ask questions. Okay, and just another grammar. before we do some exercises. We can also put like the time expression before we have a subject and a verb. I'll talk about that in a moment. I just want to go to the past simple. So really important, past simple, very common way to learn how to speak about what happened to you yesterday, or you want to tell someone about your weekend or what you did on your trip. Use the past simple grammar. It's the easiest way. All you need to do is have a subject, I, you, he, she, it, we, they, and then you have an action and you add the ed to that action. And this is called the regular. It just means the regular rule, the first rule. Okay, so for example, I studied yesterday. I played soccer with my friends. I watched a movie. My family and I cooked dinner together. Okay, so that's how we make a subject. If the verb ends in an E, you just add a D. So live, for example, to live would be lived. If you had the verb that ends in a Y, like study, you take off the Y and you add IED. So yesterday I studied for my exam. If the verb ends in an L, for example, travel, then you add double LED. So last weekend I traveled with my friends to the country. Now we have irregular verbs. So that means that they break the rules, that they have their own rules. And it's verbs like went, made, saw, taught, wrote, bought, and took. So you could see that there is no ED. They have their own rule. So you just have to learn them. I can send you a list of irregular verbs in the past simple. So went comes from the verb go. Made comes from the verb make. Saw comes from the verb see. Taught, teach. Wrote from the verb write. Bought, buy. Took, take. Now to make it a negative, this action, you just add didn't, verb. So there's no ED. So for example, yesterday I didn't see my friend. Last weekend I didn't travel anywhere, or I didn't go anywhere. Last week I didn't make dinner. Last week I didn't call you because I was busy. Okay, so it's sentences like that. So in the negative, we don't just add not, but we add didn't. And it's the same for all subjects. I didn't, you didn't, he didn't, we didn't, they didn't, you all didn't. Okay, so that is how we use our action words in the past. It's called the past simple. And we have rules for the regular ones. You just add the ED. Or maybe be careful, the action word could be irregular. It means it has a different word. It does not have ED in the past. Okay, so that's how we tell people what we did in the past. Now, as I said just before, we can add the time expression before the subject, before the verb. So this is time expressions like yesterday. Okay, I went to the beach. Or last night, I saw my friend. Or 2 days ago, I was in class. Or on Thursday, I went to the gym. Okay, so the time expression means when did you do the action? So we can put that at the beginning of our sentence, which makes it nice and easy to understand when are you talking about first, and then what action happened. So we can use words like in, in July last year, I went to the USA. Or you could say in 2021, I began my business. Or in the afternoon, I went to the movies. Or in the morning, okay? That's all in the past. You could use the preposition on. So on Wednesday, I saw my friend. Occasion, that means like Christmas, New Year's, birthday. So on, on Valentine's Day, I went for dinner. Or you could say on the weekend. That's the past time expression. On the weekend, I visited my grandmother. You could also use last week. That's a time expression. Last week, I went to the beach. Last month, I saw an amazing film. Last year, I bought a home, or I moved to Australia. Okay, so now we can also add the time expression before telling someone what did we do. So it's very easy to say when you did it first and then what did you do. Okay, so now let's get into some of our grammar practice. So we could see here past lives. So we've got two photos. This first one looks like it's a black and white photo from a long time ago, so the past. And this photo looks like it's present. Present means like now, recently. So we could see there's a boy and a little girl. And in this photo, there's a man and a woman. So let's listen to an audio and hear what the information is about these two photos. Okay, so let's listen to the audio and answer questions 2, answer questions 3, and questions 4. Okay, so let's listen. Remember, this audio is going to be about the two pictures that we saw before, and we're going to answer these questions.
Track 56. Unit 6, Opener.
During the 1970s and 80s, Chris Porsche took lots of black and white photographs of local people in his city. 30 years later, Chris looked for the same people by putting the old photos on his website and in the newspaper. Donna and Stephen saw their photo from 1981 and they contacted Chris. It shows them as children in front of their old family house. They don't live in the house now, but they live in the same city. They returned to the street, and Chris took the second photo in 2015.
So again, in the photo, Donna and Stephen were the two people that we saw. One, they were young in that first photo, the black and white one, and then they were adult and adults in the second photo. They are brothers and sisters. The photo was taken in the 70s and 80s. Now, we talked about the time before. That's why I wanted to teach you this first. So in the 70s and the 80s would mean in the 20th century, okay? It would mean 1970 or in the time of 1980. And we know the first photo is from 1981. So that's how we say this year, 1981. Now, when you get into the 2000, you've got an option. You can say 2015, the year 2015, or the year 2015. So you have two options to pronounce this one. But in this one, you can only say 1981. You don't say 19,081. So we have some things to match. The 1970s is this year. This is the 1970s. It's from the year, 1970 would be from the year 1970 to 1979. For question 3, the 1970s. Okay, so if someone said to you, I was born in the 1970s, it means sometime in this year. So for me, I was born in the 1980s. The end of the 18th century would be this year. Okay, the 18th century would be the last few years of the 18th century. The beginning of the 21st century, 2002. Because the 21st century started, if we have a look here, the 21st century started in the year 2000 and it will end in the year 2099. So 2002 is in the very beginning of the 21st century. The 60s is these years. So if someone said I was born in the 60s, that means from sometime from 1960 to 1969. And the 19th century is this year, the years 1800 to 1899. Okay, we have some questions. So you can Google these questions. The first photograph in history, when was it taken? The first photograph of history was taken in the 19th century because the first photo was in 1827. Okay, so we just want to practice saying the years. So I can give you the information, but you can practice saying the years. So the first photo was taken in the 19th century. We can also write century as a capital C and 19th in the year 1827. The first euro currency, so in Europe, that's the money that they use, was in the 1970s. So the 1970s, the 70s. I don't think I have the answer here. So the 1970s would be 1970 to 1979. Okay, so this was, I'll make it easier, the first photo. This one was the euro currency. That's the mobile phone. Was actually in 2002, in the 21st century. So the first mobile phone. So in Australia, we say mobile, we don't say cell phone. It was in the 21st century, the year 2002. The Beatles was a group of people that sang a lot famous songs around the world. You would hear it's a group of men called the Beatles, and they were a rock group, really famous. They were famous in the 60s. So the 60s. So remember, the 60s is the year 1960 to 1969. Okay, so that's when we had the Beatles in this time. And the American Revolution, which was a period of war in America. So the American Revolution was at the end of the 18th century. So it was sometime from 1789 to 1799. Okay, so these were just some things in time. We could see when did they happen. The first photo, the 19th century, the euro, was in this time. The first mobile phone was in 2002. The band, the Beatles, was in the 60s, and the American Revolution was in this time. Okay, let's read a little article together. And when we read, we're looking at currency. So we're talking about currency, which is a type of money. Okay, so in Australia, we use the dollar. That is the currency of Australia. In China, the yen. In Vietnam, what's your currency? How do I spell that? D-O-N. G, dong. Okay, interesting. I never hear that one. So that's the currency. It means like what type of money. So before we read, in Brazil, it's interesting when you look at the money of other countries, they have something on it. Maybe they have buildings or animals or people. It's always interesting. Look at the notes, the money of another country. So in Brazil, they have what they call, their currency is the real. So their 50 real has the jaguar. We can see here the animal, jaguar. Okay, they're on Brazil. They also have hummingbirds, sea turtles. Yeah, really interesting animals on the Brazilian notes. So a lot of animals on the currency of Brazilian reals. There's a woman. So the woman on every Brazilian reals note is Marianne. So her name is Marianne. It is the name given to the sculpture by French soldiers at the time, mixing two popular names, Mary and Anne. So that's a bit of history of who this woman is on every Brazilian note, if you look at the other side. In Colombia, they have the 2,000 pesos note, and it has a woman on it. Her name is Deborah Arongo. She's an artist. In Australia, we have, for example, the $50 Australian note, and it has David Unaipon. He was in politics. So he's an Aboriginal man who was known to be good at being an author, a publisher. He invented things, and he was just a good public speaker in politics. In Korea, they have the 10,000 won, and they have a king on there, which the king was from the 14th century, from the year the 1300 to the year 1399. Okay, so now we're going to read an article on currencies. So we know currency means the type of money, to practice our pronunciation, and let's look for those past verbs. So don't forget the past simple verbs. We've got the verb to be, or maybe your past verb with the ed or the irregular. Okay, so let's read together so we can practice pronunciation and reading. Okay, so we have famous faces. Okay, famous faces. George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. He was born in 1732 and lived during the American Revolution. He died in 1799, but his face wasn't on the US dollar until the 19th century. Now, his face is on the US $1 note, and it is famous around the world. On January the 1st, 2002, there was a new currency in Europe, the euro. The new notes were different from traditional money because there weren't any famous people on the notes. Instead, there were pictures of different types of buildings from different times and places across Europe. Frida Kahlo painted and studied art when she was young. On August the 21st, 1929, she married the artist Diego Rivera, and they lived and worked in Mexico City. During the 1930s, they traveled around the world. Their paintings were famous in many countries. Today, Frida and Diego's faces are on the Mexican 500 peso note. So we're going to go back to the past simple tense where we looked at the verb to be. Remember, was or were, depending on I was, you were, he was, she was, it was, we were, or they were. So we use this verb again when we talk about our age, our location, our job, some emotive verb. And we're going to practice looking at this verb to be, writing for number 5 about the Queen. Okay, Queen Elizabeth II. So let's read together and do it together. So the famous face of Queen Elizabeth II is on many different notes. When she was, because remember for he, she, it, you have to say was. So when she was a child, she was on the Canadian dollar. That was in 1936. By 1953, there were, because the plural, there were 9 countries with her face on their notes. Surprisingly, the Queen's face wasn't. We have a negative. We just add the not to the verb to be. So she wasn't on the British pound note until 1960. For a long time, there weren't, plural, there weren't any happy faces. The plural comes from the noun faces. Happy is an adjective. So there weren't any happy faces. There was a happy face on the Scottish £5 note. Okay, so just in this little information about Queen Elizabeth II, because this is in the past, it's not happening now. Now she's passed away. So we have to use the verb was, but if it's plural, we say were. If we're talking, remember, about a noun, that's when we say there was, or the plural, there were, with the noun in the plural. So we can see here, we're saying when she was a child. So remember we talked about these time expressions. So in number 7, the time expression, we can put that before the subject, before the verb. So let's have a look at number 7. When I was a child, Let's put them in order. We've got some of these time expressions. Yesterday is another time expression. During the 19th century, the 60s, last Monday evening, before the 18th century, in 1799, this morning, last March, on January the 1st, 2000, a week ago. All of these words were time expressions in the past. And as I said, they go before the subject. So we're going to number them. Which one is, number 1 is F, before the 18th century. So which one comes in time? We've got before the 18th century. Then we have in 1799. And then if we move up in time, then we've got the 19th century. Number 3C. Then D will be number 4, the 60s. Remember, the 60s is the year 1960 to 1969. Then we have number 5, when I was a child. So when I was a child. And then number J, 2000. And then I, last March. Then we have a week ago. Number K, 8. Then we have E, last night. Then we have yesterday. And then we have this morning. So we could see the time. It starts with this morning, and then we go back into time. Yesterday, last night, a week ago, last March, the year 2000, when I was a child, because I was a child in 1980, early 1980s. Then the 60s, then the 19th century, then 1799, and then before the 18th century. Okay, just using some of our time expressions, knowing that we can put these before a sentence to talk about when did the action happen. Now, we can also do questions. As I said, I showed you before. Questions, we can start with the W. What, when, where, why, who, then the verb to be, and then the subject and the verb. Or maybe you can start straight away with the verb to be, and then the subject. So let's make some sentences. Number 8, when were your grandparents born? So grandparents is a noun and it's plural. So we need to use the plural of the verb to be. So when were your grandparents born? So that's a question you can ask your friends. When were your grandparents born? Number 2, when was your last holiday? Because the subject is you, and we know we say because it's the possessive adjective here. When was your last holiday? Because the noun is the holiday. That's where we get the was from. Number 3, where. So where is a question about location. Where were you on January the 1st this year? Okay, where were you? What month were you born in? Who were some famous people in the 20th century? Okay, so make sure that when you ask a question using the W's, that you start with the W. It could be when, it could be where, what, who. Then you have the verb to be. But make sure you look at the noun. If it's plural, then it should say were. Or if it's singular, it would say was. Okay, so that's just some questions that we could ask with the W questions. Okay, so we talked about, we're going to go back to talk about the past simple. So the past simple, it means that I have a finished, completed action. That whatever I did, if I played soccer yesterday, or I swam in the ocean, or I watched a movie, that's finished. I'm not doing it now. It's a past, finished, completed action. So number 9, what do we do to make these actions in the past? We add the ed. Okay, you make it past by adding the ed. That's for the regular verbs. But if it's irregular, some of them we just need to say went, made, saw, taught, wrote, bought, took. But there is some rules. If it ends in an E, we just add the D. If it ends in a Y, you add the IED. If it ends in an L, you double the L and then you add ED. So let's practice with question 10. Barack Obama lived in the White House from 2009 to 2017. So that's a finished, completed action. He lived in the White House. They studied English together at university. So maybe I'm talking about my friends when they were young, or my parents. They studied English together at university. So finished, completed action. They're not doing it now. It comes from the verb study. We take off the Y, we add ed. The artist Georgia O'Keeffe painted, that's a regular verb, painted during the 20th century. The composer Arthur Honegger died in 1955. The astronaut Sally Ride traveled. So remember, if you have a verb that ends in an L, like to travel, you put another L and then you add ed. So she traveled into space in 1983. Angela Merkel worked as a scientist before she was Chancellor of Germany. Okay, regular verb, add ed. I finished university last year with a degree in art. My parents started their business before I was born. So regular verb. Let's talk about pronunciation. How do we pronounce the ending of these verbs, if it's regular or irregular? So if we have a look here, it depends if there's a syllable means like how much sound does the word have. So for example, live just has one sound, live. But if I say the word paint, that's 2 sounds, paint. Or if I say visit, that's 3 sounds, visited. Sorry, paint is one word, but when I put it in the past, painted. So let's start with the first syllable, live, lived. Like is pronounced liked, and work is pronounced worked. So you just have to imagine that the E is silent. So if the verb ends in an E, you don't pronounce it. Lived, liked, worked. Okay, you got to imagine that the E is silent. If it ends in a T, then it's going to have a 2-syllable sound like painted, wanted, traveled, started. Okay, that's how we pronounce it. So there's a ted sound at the end. This was a d, lived, liked, worked, but this one is painted, wanted. There's a ted sound. If it's a verb like this one that has a vowel in it, then we have to separate that vowel to have its own sound, its own syllable. So visited, visited. Okay, so now you are going to write about someone's life. Okay, who inspires you? So you need to pick someone that maybe is no longer alive. Okay, so you could see I've put some famous people up here, and you're going to tell us something about their life. Okay, so write about someone's life because we want to practice the past simple grammar. So let's read some examples. So you could see we have, let's see. So we have Eloise says, Oscar Ribeiro de Almeida Neymera Soares Filho was a Brazilian architect, considered one of the key figures in the development of modern architecture. He was born in 1907 in Rio de Janeiro and died in 2012, also in Rio de Janeiro. He became well known after planning the city of Brasília, which became the capital of Brazil in 1960, and also participated in the group of architects nominated by UN member states who designed the UN nation headquarters in New York in the United States. And this is a photo of him. Okay, so we can see information about someone using the past simple verb. I'll just read one more. So this is about Frida Kahlo. So Frida Kahlo was a Mexican painter born in 1907. She was the author of 150 works, mainly self-portraits, in which she projected her struggles to survive, her ability to turn suffering into art, her courage in the face of challenges, and her authenticity are an inspiration to me in my personal journey of creative expression and inner strength. I admire her resilience, her passion for life, and her unwavering determination. And there's an image here. Okay, so now you are going to write, pick someone that inspires you, someone who is no longer alive, and write about their life. When were they born? What did they do in this world that was amazing? And why do they mean a lot to you? Why do you feel inspired by this person? Remember to practice your past simple verbs, actions that happened in the past, they're not happening now. We know the rules. We know the verb to be, was or were in the past. We know we have regular verbs and we have irregular verbs. Okay, so that allows us now to write about people's lives, to say what we did in our past time, maybe yesterday or last weekend. So the past simple, really simple way of speaking, telling people what happened, what we did in our past.